The steam whistle pierced the desert air like a dying woman's scream. And as the locomotive ground to a halt at the Mojave station platform, a young woman in a dusty traveling dress stumbled down the steps with tears streaming down her cheeks, her small trunk hitting the wooden planks with a thud that echoed the breaking of her heart. Helena Zimmerman had never felt so alone in her 22 years of life. The journey from Philadelphia had taken nearly 2 weeks, and every mile westward had felt like another chain binding her to a fate she had chosen in desperation, but now feared with every fiber of her being. The telegram from Gerald Whitmore had been brief, businesslike, describing his ranch outside Mojave, California, and his need for a wife to help manage his household. He had sent money for passage, and a single photograph that showed a stern-faced man with a thick mustache standing beside a horse. The photograph had told her nothing about kindness, nothing about warmth, nothing about whether this stranger would treat her with any measure of human decency. The tears came because she had no other choice. Her father had died 6 months prior, leaving debts that consumed everything. Her mother had passed when Helena was just a child. Her father's creditors had made it clear they would see her working in a factory or worse to settle his accounts. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like providence, but now, standing on this desolate platform in the harsh Nevada-California border region, with sand devils spinning in the hot September wind of 1882, she wondered if she had simply traded one prison for another. She tried to compose herself, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief already damp from the tears she had shed privately in the train car. The other passengers moved around her, collecting luggage, greeting family members, conducting business. She stood alone, searching the sparse crowd for a face that matched the photograph tucked in her traveling bag. "Miss Zimmerman." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured. Helena turned, trying to arrange her tear-stained face into something resembling dignity, and found herself looking up at a man who bore little resemblance to the photograph she had studied so intently. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 27 or 28, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling gray-green, like sage in morning light, and they held an expression she could not quite read as they took in her obvious distress. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Whitmore, that would be me." He removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture that seemed automatic, ingrained by someone who had taught him manners. His gaze moved from her face to her trunk and back again. "You have been crying." It was not a question, and Helena felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her. She had wanted to meet her future husband with some semblance of composure, to at least pretend that she was entering into this arrangement with confidence. Instead, here she stood, red-eyed and trembling, looking like exactly what she was, a desperate woman with nowhere else to go. "I apologize," she began, but he raised a hand to stop her. "No need for apologies." He stepped closer, and Helena instinctively took a step back. Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition of her fear, and he stopped moving. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. "Wipe those tears. You are home." The words were so unexpected, so gentle despite his somewhat gruff delivery, that Helena felt a sob catch in her throat. Home. She had not had a real home since her father's health had begun to fail, since the debts had started piling up, since the world had become a cold and calculating place where everything, even marriage, was reduced to a transaction. "I am sorry," she said again, unable to stop herself. "I am not usually so emotional. The journey was long and I did not sleep well, and everything is so different here than what I am accustomed to." "You are from Philadelphia." Again, it was not a question. "This is not Philadelphia." The desert takes some getting used to. He bent to lift her trunk as though it weighed nothing, settling it on one broad shoulder. With his free hand, he gestured toward a wagon waiting at the end of the platform. "The ranch is about an hour's ride. We can talk on the way or you can rest. Either is fine." Helena followed him, her legs unsteady beneath her skirts. The wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by two horses that looked equally well cared for. Gerald set her trunk in the back and then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hands at her waist were brief and impersonal, but she noticed their strength and the calluses that spoke of hard work. Once he had climbed up beside her and taken the reins, they began moving through the small town of Mojave. It was nothing like Philadelphia, nothing like any place Helena had ever seen. Low buildings huddled together as if seeking mutual protection from the vast emptiness that surrounded them. The streets were unpaved, and dust rose in clouds from the wagon wheels. Men in work clothes and women in practical dresses moved about their business, most paying no attention to the wagon passing through. "It is not much," Gerald said, following her gaze, "but it serves its purpose. We get supplies here twice a month. There is a church, a school, a doctor. Everything necessary." "It seems very isolated," Helena ventured, and immediately worried she had offended him, but Gerald just nodded. "It is. If you need constant social engagement, you will find yourself disappointed, but there are good people here. My neighbors, the Richardsons, have a daughter about your age. She will probably visit once she hears you have arrived." They left the town behind, heading south on a rough road that cut through scrubland dotted with Joshua trees and sage. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and Helena was grateful for the bonnet she wore, though it did little to ease the heat. Back east, September meant the beginning of autumn, the first hints of cool weather. Here, the heat seemed as intense as midsummer. Gerald drove in silence for a while, and Helena found herself stealing glances at him. His profile was strong, his jaw set in what seemed to be his natural expression. He handled the reins with easy competence, guiding the horses around the worst of the ruts. Everything about him spoke of capability and self-sufficiency. She wondered what had driven him to seek a mail-order bride when he surely could have courted any number of local women. "You must have questions," he said finally, not looking at her. Helena did have questions, hundreds of them, but she hardly knew where to begin. "Your letter mentioned cattle ranching." "That is right. I run about 300 head on 2,000 acres. It is not the biggest operation in the area, but it is mine. I built the house myself 5 years ago when I first claimed the land. It is solid, comfortable. You will have your own room until we—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Until we decide how we want to proceed." The relief that flooded through Helena was almost overwhelming. She had been terrified that he would expect immediate intimacy, that she would be nothing more than an acquired possession. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate your consideration." "I am not a brute," Gerald said, and there was something in his tone that made Helena look at him more closely. "Despite what you may have heard about Western men, not all of us treat women like chattel. My mother raised me better than that." "Your mother lives with you?" "No. She passed 3 years ago. The fever took her and my father both in the same week." His hands tightened on the reins, the only sign of emotion. "That is why I need a wife. The house is too empty. The work is too much for one person, and I find I am tired of being alone." The honesty in his words touched something in Helena. Here was a man who could have dressed up his request in romantic language, could have pretended this was anything other than what it was, but instead he spoke plainly. She found she respected that. "I understand loneliness," she said softly. "After my father died, I stayed in our house as long as I could, but eventually the creditors came. Everything was sold. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like a chance at something better than the alternatives available to me. What were those alternatives? Factory work, service work, or... She could not bring herself to name the other possibility, but Gerald seemed to understand. "I am glad you answered my advertisement then," he said, "and I am glad you are here despite the tears." They rode on, and gradually Helena found herself relaxing slightly. The landscape was harsh but possessed a stark beauty she had not expected. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and gray against the brilliant blue sky. The air smelled of dust and sage and something else she could not identify, something wild and clean that was nothing like the coal smoke and crowded humanity smell of Philadelphia. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own anxious thoughts. Gerald seemed pleased by the question. "The house sits in a small valley with a creek running through it. That is rare out here, reliable water. It is what made the location valuable. There is a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and a bunkhouse for when I hire extra hands during roundup and branding season. Right now it is just me and a man named Samuel who helps with the daily work. He is a good worker, keeps to himself mostly. You will meet him at dinner." "I am expected to cook for the hands?" Helena asked, trying to remember everything her father's housekeeper had taught her about preparing meals. She was not entirely hopeless in a kitchen, but she was far from an expert cook. "Only if you want to. Samuel usually takes care of his own meals. But it would be helpful if you could manage the household, the cooking and cleaning, the garden if you are inclined. There is also butter and cheese making, tending the chickens, preserving food for winter. I know it is a lot. I do not expect you to know how to do everything right away." "I will learn," Helena said, more firmly than she felt. "I am not afraid of work." For the first time, Gerald smiled, and the transformation was remarkable. The stern lines of his face softened, and Helena caught a glimpse of what he must have looked like as a boy, before life and loss had carved their marks into him. "I believe you," he said. The sun had moved considerably westward by the time they turned off the main road onto a narrower track. Gerald pointed ahead, just over that rise. Helena felt her heart begin to pound again. This was it, the place that would be her home for better or worse. She had committed herself to this path, and there was no turning back now. The house came into view gradually as they crested the rise, and Helena could not suppress a small gasp. It was not large, but it was solidly built of wood and stone, with a wide porch across the front and real glass windows that caught the afternoon light. Cottonwood trees grew near the house, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and she could hear the sound of running water from the creek Gerald had mentioned. Behind the house stood the barn and other outbuildings, all well maintained and orderly. It was more than she had hoped for, far more than the rough frontier cabin she had been steeling herself to accept. "You built this yourself?" she asked in wonder. "With help," Gerald admitted. "My father and some neighbors. But yes, I designed it, cut most of the timber, laid the stones for the foundation. It is not fancy, but it is sound." "It is beautiful," Helena said honestly, and she saw Gerald's shoulders relax slightly as if her approval mattered to him. He pulled the wagon up to the front of the house and climbed down, coming around to help Helena descend. As her feet touched the ground, she saw a dog emerge from the barn, a large mixed breed with a reddish coat and intelligent eyes. It trotted over and sat politely near Gerald, tail wagging. "This is Red," Gerald said. "He is friendly but will bark at strangers until he knows you." Helena extended her hand for the dog to sniff, and Red gave her fingers a thorough investigation before apparently deciding she was acceptable. His tail wagged harder and he pushed his head under her hand for petting. "He likes you," Gerald observed. "That is a good sign." A man emerged from the barn, older than Gerald, with weathered skin and gray streaking his dark hair. He touched his hat brim when he saw Helena and gave a nod but did not approach. "That is Samuel," Gerald said quietly. "Samuel, come meet Miss Zimmerman. She will be staying." Samuel approached with the cautious air of a man unused to social interaction. "Pleased to meet you, madam." "And you," Helena said, offering a small smile. "Samuel, would you bring Miss Zimmerman's trunk inside? Put it in the spare room for now." "Yes, sir." Samuel moved to comply, and Gerald gestured for Helena to follow him up the porch steps. The inside of the house was dim after the bright sunlight, and Helena blinked as her eyes adjusted. The main room was larger than she had expected, with a stone fireplace at one end and a kitchen area at the other. A table and chairs occupied the center, and there were two comfortable-looking chairs near the fireplace. Everything was clean and orderly, if somewhat Spartan. A hallway led to what she assumed were the bedrooms. "The spare room is the second door on the left," Gerald said. "It has a bed, a dresser, a washstand. My room is at the end of the hall. There is also a small room I use as an office and a bathing room. I had an inside pump installed last year so we do not have to haul water from the creek for everything." The presence of indoor plumbing, even rudimentary, was another pleasant surprise. Helena had been prepared for far more primitive conditions. Samuel brought her trunk in and carried it down the hall. When he returned, Gerald said, "We will let you settle in. Dinner is usually around 7. If you need anything, call out. I will be nearby." Left alone, Helena made her way to the spare room. It was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a window that looked out toward the creek. The bed had a simple quilt. The dresser was empty and waiting for her things, and the washstand held a basin and pitcher of water. It was more privacy than she had dared hope for. She sank down on the bed and finally allowed herself to fully feel the enormousness of what she had done. She had traveled more than 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. She was in a place so remote that the nearest town was an hour away, and that town was itself in the middle of nowhere. Everything familiar was gone. Everything certain was lost. But as she sat there, listening to the sound of the creek and the rustle of the cottonwood leaves, she felt something else too. A small, fragile sense of possibility. Gerald Whitmore had not been cruel. He had not been presumptuous. He had told her to wipe her tears and called this place home, and perhaps in time it could be. She rose and began unpacking her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the small wardrobe, arranging her personal items on the dresser. It did not take long. She had not been able to bring much. When she finished, she changed from her traveling dress into something more practical and washed her face and hands in the basin. A glance at the small clock she had brought told her it was nearly 6. She should probably help with dinner if she wanted to make a good impression. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Helena made her way back to the main room. Gerald was at the kitchen area, pulling items from a larder. He looked up when she entered, and she saw surprise cross his face. "I thought you might rest," he said. "I rested on the train." "Is there something I can help with for dinner?" He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Can you make biscuits?" "Yes, I can manage biscuits." "Good. The flour is there, the other ingredients in the cupboard. I will work on the rest." They moved around the kitchen in careful coordination, not speaking much but aware of each other's presence. Helena found the ingredients she needed and began mixing dough, her hands falling into the familiar rhythm her father's housekeeper had taught her. Gerald worked on frying salt pork and preparing beans, his movements efficient and practiced. It was oddly companionable, this quiet work side by side. When Samuel came in for dinner, They all sat at the table together. The food was simple but filling, and Helena was surprised to discover she was hungry despite her anxiety. The men ate steadily, and there was little conversation, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. "These biscuits are good," Samuel said, reaching for a third one. "Better than Gerald's." "Thank you," Helena said, feeling a small glow of pride. After dinner, Samuel excused himself and returned to the bunkhouse. Gerald and Helena cleared the table together, and he heated water for washing the dishes. Helena found herself watching his hands as he worked, noticing how capable they were, how they handled even domestic tasks with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. "You do not have to help with this," she said. "I can manage." "I have been managing alone for a while now," Gerald said. "One more night will not hurt. Tomorrow you can establish however you want to run the household." When the kitchen was clean, an awkward moment descended. It was not yet fully dark, but the day was ending and Helena was not sure what was expected of her. Gerald seemed to sense her uncertainty. "You must be tired from your journey. You should rest. I will be up early to start work, but you can sleep as late as you need. There is no rush to establish routines." "Thank you," Helena said softly, "for everything, for being kind." Something shifted in Gerald's expression, a softening around his eyes. "You took a leap of faith coming here. The least I can do is try to make you feel welcome." Helena made her way to the spare room and closed the door behind her. She changed into her nightgown and lay down on the bed, expecting to toss and turn for hours. But the exhaustion of travel and emotion caught up with her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of a rooster crowing. For a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then it all came back in a rush. Mojave. The ranch. Gerald Whitmore. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main room. Gerald was already gone, but he had left the fire banked in the stove and coffee warming on it. A note on the table said simply, "Help yourself to anything you need." Helena poured coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the ranch in morning light. She could see Gerald in the distance, working with one of the horses in a corral. He moved with an easy grace, clearly at home with the animals. Red sat nearby, watching his master with devoted attention. This was her life now. These empty rooms waiting to be filled with purpose. This man who was still a stranger but who had shown her unexpected kindness. This harsh, beautiful land so different from everything she had known. She finished her coffee and began exploring the kitchen more thoroughly, taking inventory of what was available. There was flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, dried beans, salt pork, some potatoes stored in a cool cellar, eggs from the chickens, milk that must have been brought up from the cold creek that morning. It was enough to work with. By the time Gerald and Samuel came in for the midday meal, Helena had prepared a simple stew and fresh cornbread. She had also swept the floors, aired out the bedding in the main room, and begun to make a list of things they would need from town on their next supply run. Gerald's eyebrows rose when he saw the table set and ready. "You have been busy." "I wanted to earn my keep," Helena said. "You do not need to prove anything," Gerald replied, but he looked pleased as he sat down to eat. Over the next several days they fell into a routine. Gerald and Samuel worked the ranch while Helena took over the household tasks. She proved to be a quick learner, asking questions when she did not know how to do something and taking mental notes of everything. The work was hard and constant, but Helena found she did not mind. It was honest work, purposeful work, and it kept her from dwelling too much on the strangeness of her situation. Gerald was patient with her inexperience, showing her how to manage the wood stove properly, where to find the chicken feed, how to separate cream from milk. He never made her feel stupid for not knowing, never lost his temper when she made mistakes. His steady presence was oddly comforting, even as the reality of being married to this man loomed in her future. They had not discussed the marriage ceremony yet. Helena knew it needed to happen soon, that her position here was precarious until it was formalized, but she was grateful that Gerald did not seem to be in any rush. He treated her with respect, always knocking before entering a room she was in, never presuming on their arrangement. At the end of her first week at the ranch, Gerald announced they would go into Mojave the next day for supplies and to speak with the preacher about arranging a wedding. Helena's heart jumped into her throat. "So soon?" Gerald looked at her steadily. "People in town know I sent for a mail-order bride. If we wait too long, there will be talk. I do not care for myself, but I do not want your reputation damaged." He was right, of course. Helena knew the rules of propriety, even if they seemed somewhat absurd given her circumstances. "When were you thinking?" "The following Sunday, if the preacher is available. That gives you another week to prepare if you need it." A week. In a week, she would be married to this man. The thought filled her with a complicated mixture of fear and something else she could not quite name. Not excitement exactly, but perhaps a hesitant hope. "All right," she agreed. "Sunday, then." The trip into Mojave was different this time. Helena felt more prepared for the starkness of the landscape, more appreciative of its austere beauty. Gerald drove the wagon with his usual competence, pointing out landmarks along the way. A particular Joshua tree that marked the turn to a neighbor's property. A rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant. The dry wash that became a torrent during the rare heavy rains. In town, they stopped first at the general store. Helena had made a list of things they needed, and the storekeeper, a portly man named Mr. Gibson, greeted Gerald warmly. "Good to see you, Whitmore, and this must be the young lady we heard about." "This is Miss Zimmerman," Gerald said. "She will be Mrs. Whitmore by Sunday next." "Well, congratulations to you both," Mr. Gibson said, beaming. "Let me get Mrs. Gibson. She will want to meet you, miss." Mrs. Gibson emerged from the back of the store, a round, cheerful woman who immediately took Helena's hands in hers. "My dear, welcome to Mojave. We are so glad to have another young woman in the area. It gets lonely for us ladies sometimes with all these rough men around." "Thank you," Helena said, warming to the woman's genuine friendliness. "I am still learning my way, but everyone has been very kind." "Gerald Whitmore is a good man," Mrs. Gibson said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You are lucky to have him. He could have had his pick of the girls around here, but he is the loyal type. Once he commits to something, he sees it through." Helena was not sure how to respond to that, so she simply smiled and turned her attention to the supplies. Mrs. Gibson helped her select some additional items she had not thought of, including fabric for a new dress. "You will want something nice for your wedding day," Mrs. Gibson said firmly. "This calico is pretty and practical. It will serve you well." While Helena and Mrs. Gibson looked at fabric, Gerald conducted his business with Mr. Gibson, purchasing ammunition, tobacco, and various other supplies. When they were finished, he loaded everything into the wagon and then guided Helena down the street to the church. The preacher, Reverend Matthews, was a thin man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He welcomed them into his small office and listened as Gerald explained they wanted to be married the following Sunday. "I am happy to perform the ceremony," Reverend Matthews said. "Have you both been baptized and raised in the Christian faith?" Helena nodded. "I was raised Episcopalian in Philadelphia." "And I was raised Methodist," Gerald added. "My parents were devout people." "Excellent. I will need to speak with each of you separately before the ceremony, just to ensure you are both entering into this marriage of your own free will and with understanding of the commitment you are making." Gerald stood. "I will wait outside while you speak with Miss Zimmerman." When they were alone, Reverend Matthews leaned forward, his expression serious. "Miss Zimmerman, I feel I must ask, are you entering into this marriage willingly? No one is forcing you." "No one is forcing me," Helena said honestly. "I came here of my own choice, knowing I would marry Mr. Whitmore." "And do you have any concerns about him? Any reason to believe he might treat you poorly?" Helena considered the question carefully. "He has been nothing but respectful and kind in the time I have been here. I know we are strangers still, but I have no reason to fear him." Reverend Matthews nodded slowly. "Mail-order marriages are not uncommon out here, but I always want to be certain both parties understand what they are undertaking. Marriage is a sacred bond, Miss Zimmerman. It requires commitment, patience, and grace. There will be difficult times. Are you prepared for that?" "I am prepared to try my best," Helena said. "I know it will not always be easy, but I am not afraid of hard work or challenge." "That is good to hear." The Reverend smiled. "I think you will do well here. Gerald Whitmore is a man of integrity. He lost his parents to illness, and I know the loneliness has weighed on him. You both deserve happiness, and I pray you will find it together." After the Reverend had spoken privately with Gerald, he scheduled the ceremony for Sunday afternoon. There would be no elaborate celebration, no fancy dress or large gathering. It would be simple and quick, with Samuel and the Gibsons serving as witnesses. On the drive back to the ranch, Gerald was quiet. Helena found herself studying his profile again, trying to imagine what it would be like to truly be his wife, not just in name but in reality. "Are you having second thoughts?" Gerald asked suddenly, and Helena realized he had caught her staring. "No," she said quickly. "Just thinking about everything. It is all happening very fast." "We can wait longer if you need to," Gerald offered. "I do not want you to feel rushed." "No, Sunday is fine. You were right about the propriety of the situation. It is better to make things official." They rode in silence for a while longer before Gerald spoke again. "I know this is not how women dream their wedding day will be. I wish I could offer you more, but this is the reality of my life, of this place." "I do not need more," Helena said, and she meant it. She had given up on girlish dreams of romance back in Philadelphia when the reality of her situation had become clear. "I just want a chance at a decent life, at building something stable and good. That is more than I had before I came here." "Then that is what we will work toward," Gerald said. "A decent life, something stable and good." The days leading up to Sunday passed in a blur of preparation. Helena worked on her new dress in the evenings, sitting near the fire while Gerald read or worked on ranch accounts. They had begun to talk more, small conversations about nothing in particular, but each one felt like a thread being woven into the fabric of a relationship. She learned that Gerald had moved to California from Missouri at age 20 with his parents, seeking a better life in the West. His father had been a farmer, but the land here was better suited to ranching, so they had adapted. Gerald had learned the cattle business through trial and error, making mistakes but persevering. When his parents died, he had been devastated but determined to make their dream of a successful ranch succeed. Helena shared her own story more fully, talking about her childhood with educated parents who had valued learning and culture. Her father had been a bookkeeper for a shipping company, respectable but not wealthy. When her mother died of pneumonia, her father had never fully recovered, becoming increasingly fragile until the heart attack that finally took him. She spoke of the crushing realization that he had been borrowing money he could not repay, trying to maintain their lifestyle while his health failed. The shame and fear of those final weeks before she had answered Gerald's advertisement still made her voice shake. "You were brave to come here," Gerald said quietly one evening as they sat by the fire. It takes courage to choose an uncertain future over a certain hardship. I am not sure it was courage, Helena admitted. It may have just been desperation. Sometimes they are the same thing. Saturday evening, the night before the wedding, Gerald knocked on Helena's door after dinner. "Come in," she called, setting aside the needlework she had been doing. Gerald entered, holding something wrapped in cloth. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I wanted to give you this before tomorrow." He handed her the bundle, and Helena carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a beautiful shawl, woven in shades of cream and soft blue. The workmanship was exquisite, far finer than anything she had seen in the general store. "It was my mother's," Gerald said. "She wore it on her wedding day. I thought if you wanted you could wear it tomorrow. I know it is not much, but it is something." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the gesture. "It is beautiful. Are you sure you want me to wear it?" "My mother would have wanted it used, not packed away. She would have liked you, I think. You have her same determination." Helena ran her fingers over the soft wool, imagining the woman who had worn it before her. Gerald's mother, who had left her home in Missouri to build a new life in the West. Who had raised a son capable of kindness despite the harsh realities of frontier life. "I will wear it with honor," Helena said softly. "Thank you for trusting me with it." Gerald nodded, looking relieved. "Good. Well, I will let you rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." That night, Helena lay awake for hours, the shawl draped over the chair near her bed. Tomorrow she would marry a man she barely knew. Tomorrow her life would change irrevocably. She thought about the tears she had shed on the train platform just 2 weeks ago, how lost and frightened she had felt. Gerald's words echoed in her mind. "Wipe those tears. You are home." Perhaps he had been right. Perhaps this stark, beautiful place could become home. Perhaps this quiet, steady man could become someone she could build a life with. It was not the future she had imagined as a girl, but it was a future, and that was more than she had dared hope for during those dark days in Philadelphia. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Helena rose early and prepared breakfast for Gerald and Samuel, then returned to her room to dress. The new calico dress fit well, its simple lines flattering her figure. She arranged her dark hair carefully, pinning it up in a style that was both neat and feminine. Finally, she draped the shawl around her shoulders, feeling the weight of its history and significance. When she emerged from her room, Gerald was waiting in the main room, dressed in a clean white shirt and his best vest and trousers. His hair was still damp from washing, and he had shaved carefully. He looked at Helena for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his eyes. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you. You look very handsome." Samuel had hitched up the wagon, and the three of them made the journey into Mojave together. The small church was cool and dim inside, offering relief from the midday heat. Reverend Matthews was waiting, as were Mr. and Mrs. Gibson, both dressed in their Sunday best. The ceremony itself was brief and solemn. Helena and Gerald stood before the simple altar, repeating the traditional vows. Gerald's voice was steady and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her. Helena's voice shook slightly, but she managed to get through her own vows without faltering. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them man and wife, Gerald leaned down and kissed Helena gently on the forehead. It was a chaste kiss, appropriate for their audience, but Helena felt the warmth of his lips on her skin and knew that everything had changed. Mrs. Gibson insisted they all come to her home for a simple celebration. She had prepared a cake and some refreshments, and the small group gathered in the Gibsons' parlor, talking and laughing. It was a warmer welcome than Helena had expected, and she found herself genuinely enjoying the company. But eventually, it was time to return to the ranch. As the wagon rolled away from Mojave, Helena was acutely aware of the ring on her finger, a simple gold band that Gerald had slipped on during the ceremony. She was Helena Whitmore now, a married woman, bound by law and faith to the man sitting beside her. Back at the ranch, Samuel discreetly took himself off to the bunkhouse, leaving Gerald and Helena alone in the house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Gerald stood by the window, looking out at his land, his hands clasped behind his back. "I want you to know," he said without turning around, "that nothing has to change tonight. The marriage is legal now. You are safe and secure, but I will not presume anything. You can keep your room for as long as you need." Helena felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something else, something she did not quite want to examine too closely. "You have been very patient with me." "You deserve patience," Gerald said, finally turning to face her. "You have had your whole life uprooted. I will not add to that by making demands." They stood looking at each other across the dimming room, two people bound together by vows and necessity, not yet sure what they might become to each other. The days that followed the wedding fell into a deeper routine. Helena continued to manage the household, but now there was a subtle shift in her sense of ownership. This was her home now, truly and legally. She began to make small changes, rearranging the kitchen for better efficiency, adding wildflowers to the table, hanging curtains she sewed from fabric scraps. Gerald noticed each change, and Helena could see his approval in the way his eyes lingered on the small improvements. They talked more easily now, conversation flowing naturally over meals and in the evenings. She learned about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to improve the breeding stock, his hope to eventually add sheep to diversify their income. He asked about her life in Philadelphia, about the books she had loved, the places she had walked, the friends she had left behind. She told him about the theater performances she had attended with her father, the libraries where she had spent hours reading, the parks where she had watched the seasons change. "You miss it?" Gerald asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I miss some things," Helena admitted. "The culture, the convenience, but I do not miss the crowding or the noise or the constant feeling of being watched and judged." "There is judgment out here too," Gerald said, "just less people doing the judging." Helena laughed softly. "That is fair. But somehow it feels less oppressive when there is all this space around you." 3 weeks after the wedding, Helena woke in the middle of the night to the sound of shouting. She threw on her robe and ran to the main room, finding Gerald pulling on his boots, his face grim. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Wolves in with the cattle. Samuel is already out there. Stay in the house." "Gerald, be careful." He paused, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Then he grabbed his rifle and disappeared into the night. Helena stood at the window, straining to see anything in the darkness. She heard gunshots, distant and sharp, then more shouting. Red barked frantically from somewhere near the barn. The minutes stretched endlessly. When Gerald finally returned, his shirt was torn and there was blood on his sleeve. Helena rushed to him. "Are you hurt?" "Just a scratch where I caught it on barbed wire. We got the wolves off, but we lost 2 calves." Helena helped him out of the ruined shirt, examining the long scratch along his forearm. It was not deep but needed cleaning. She heated water and fetched clean cloths, tending to the wound with hands that shook slightly. "You do not need to fuss," Gerald said, but he did not pull away. "You are hurt. I am allowed to fuss." She cleaned and bandaged the wound carefully, aware of his eyes on her as she worked. When she finished, her hands were still resting on his arm and neither of them moved. "Helena," Gerald said softly. She looked up at him, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and desire that had been building slowly over the past weeks. When he leaned down and kissed her, it was different from the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was searching and real, a question and an answer all at once. Helena kissed him back, her hands moving to his shoulders. The fear she had felt when he had run out into the darkness, the relief when he had returned safely, all of it poured into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Gerald rested his forehead against hers. "I did not mean to presume," he said. "You are not presuming," Helena whispered. "I am your wife." "You are my wife," Gerald agreed, as if testing the words. "But I want you to be more than that. I want you to choose this. Choose me." "I do choose you," Helena said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. Somewhere along the way, this man had stopped being a stranger, stopped being just an arrangement. He had become someone she cared for, someone whose safety mattered to her, someone whose steady presence had become essential. Gerald pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and Helena felt the last of her reservations crumble. That night, for the first time, she did not sleep in the spare room. She followed Gerald down the hall to his room, to their room, and there in the darkness they began to truly become husband and wife. The next morning, Helena woke to find Gerald already up, but sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her with an expression of wonder. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." Helena felt herself blush under his gaze. "I thought I should tell you," Gerald said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, "that I am falling in love with you. I thought you should know in case it changes anything." Helena sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "It changes everything," she said, "because I am falling in love with you too." The smile that spread across Gerald's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her to him, kissing her deeply, and Helena thought that perhaps this was what home really meant. Not just a place, but a person. Not just safety, but belonging. The months that followed were a time of deep transformation. As summer gave way to fall and then to winter, Helena and Gerald's relationship deepened and matured. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned to read each other without words, learned to work together as true partners. Helena proved to be a quick study in ranch management. She took over the bookkeeping, discovering she had inherited her father's facility with numbers. She expanded the vegetable garden and began preserving food for winter with a skill that impressed even Mrs. Gibson. She learned to ride, tentatively at first but with growing confidence, accompanying Gerald on rides around the property. Gerald, for his part, revealed layers of himself that had been hidden beneath his quiet exterior. He was surprisingly well-read, with a small collection of books he had inherited from his mother. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments. He played the harmonica in the evenings, simple melodies that filled the house with music. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, their hopes and fears, their memories of childhood, their plans for the future. Gerald spoke of his desire to build the ranch into something significant, to create a legacy that would outlast him. Helena talked about her dream of starting a small school in the area, teaching the scattered children of neighboring ranches. "You would be an excellent teacher," Gerald said when she mentioned the idea. "You have the patience and the learning for it." "Do you think people would be interested?" Helena asked. "I think they would be grateful. Education is precious out here, and not everyone can spare the time to school their children properly." The physical aspect of their marriage continued to deepen as well. The initial tentative exploration gave way to genuine passion and intimacy. Helena discovered that Gerald was a considerate lover, attentive to her needs and responses. He made her feel cherished and desired, sensations that were entirely new to her. As winter set in, they spent long evenings by the fire, often simply sitting together in comfortable silence. Helena would sew or read, while Gerald worked on repairing tack or carving small wooden items. Red would sleep at their feet, occasionally twitching in dreams of chasing rabbits. In December, the Richardsons, their nearest neighbors, invited them for Christmas dinner. The Richardson family included a daughter named Mary, just a year younger than Helena, who immediately took to the newcomer. "It is so wonderful to have someone my age nearby," Mary said, linking her arm through Helena's as they helped set the table. "Most of the women around here are either much older or barely out of childhood." "I am glad to have a friend," Helena said warmly. "I have missed female companionship." The Christmas celebration was simple but joyful, with good food and warm company. As Helena sat beside Gerald at the Richardsons' table, joining in the singing of carols and the sharing of stories, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. A year ago, she had been alone and frightened in Philadelphia, facing an uncertain future. Now she was surrounded by good people, married to a man she loved, building a life that felt meaningful. On the ride home through the cold winter night, Gerald pulled Helena close under a heavy blanket. "This was a good Christmas," he said. "The best I have had in years," Helena agreed. "I am so glad I came here, Gerald, so glad I met you. Even though you stepped off that train crying," he teased gently, "even though you told me to wipe those tears that I was home, you were right." Gerald kissed the top of her head. "We are both home." The winter was mild by local standards, but it still brought challenges. There were days when ice formed on the water troughs, and the cattle huddled together for warmth. Gerald and Samuel worked long hours ensuring the animals were fed and protected. Helena kept the house warm and the meals hearty, providing comfort and sustenance when the men came in cold and exhausted. In February, Helena began to suspect she might be pregnant. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise false hopes, but as the signs became more certain, she knew she had to tell Gerald. She chose an evening when they were alone, sitting by the fire after dinner. Gerald was working on the ranch accounts, his brow furrowed in concentration. Helena watched him for a moment, gathering her courage. "Gerald, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, hearing the serious note in her voice. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong, at least I do not think so." She took a deep breath. "I think I am going to have a baby." Gerald's pencil dropped from his fingers, clattering on the table. For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him. "A baby, you are sure?" "Fairly sure. All the signs are there." "I think it happened around Christmas, so the baby would come in late summer or early fall." Gerald crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Helena into his arms, holding her tightly. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the reality of it. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Helena asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Gerald said. "I never thought I would have this. A wife I love, a child on the way, a real family." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy this time, so different from the tears she had shed on the train platform almost 6 months ago. "We need to be careful with you," Gerald said, suddenly worried. "You should not be working so hard. We need to get the doctor out here to check on you." "Gerald, I am pregnant, not an invalid," Helena laughed. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years. But I need you to be safe, both of you." His concern was touching, and Helena kissed him softly. "We will be safe. I will take care of myself, I promise." The news of the pregnancy brought a new dimension to their relationship. Gerald became even more protective, though he tried not to be overbearing about it. He insisted on doing heavier tasks Helena would normally have handled, and he worried constantly about her health. Helena found herself blooming despite the occasional nausea and fatigue. There was something deeply satisfying about carrying Gerald's child, about creating new life within her body. She began sewing tiny clothes and blankets, her hands busy in the evenings while Gerald watched with a fond expression. In March, Mary Richardson visited and Helena shared her news. Mary was delighted, immediately offering advice and assistance. "My mother has delivered 5 babies," Mary said. "She will be happy to help when your time comes, and I can help with the household tasks as you get further along." "You are a good friend," Helena said, squeezing Mary's hand. As spring arrived, the ranch came alive with new growth and activity. The cattle that had survived the winter were healthy, and several cows gave birth to calves. Gerald hired 2 additional hands for the spring roundup, young men from town who were hard workers and respectful toward Helena. She enjoyed watching Gerald in his element, managing the ranch work with skill and confidence. He was a natural leader, firm but fair with the men who worked for him. She could see how much he loved this life, this land, and it made her love him all the more. By May, Helena's pregnancy was obvious, her belly swelling with the growing child. She moved more slowly now, tiring more easily, but she was happy. She had never imagined she could feel this content, this secure in her place in the world. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch shelling peas, Gerald came up from the barn and sat beside her. He placed his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "Strong," he said with satisfaction. "Takes after the father." "Stubborn, you mean," Helena teased. "Definitely takes after the father." Gerald laughed and kissed her cheek. "I have been thinking about names." "Have you? If it is a boy, I would like to name him Thomas after my father. If it is a girl, perhaps Grace after your mother." Helena felt emotion swell in her chest. "I think those are perfect names. Honoring both our families. They made us who we are," Gerald said quietly. "Despite their flaws and struggles, they deserve to be remembered." In June, Reverend Matthews made a visit to the ranch, wanting to check on Helena's welfare. He had become a friend over the months, stopping by occasionally to share a meal and conversation. "You look well," he observed as Helena served him coffee and pie. "Happy." "I am very happy," Helena confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought possible when I first arrived here." "Gerald is a changed man as well," the Reverend said. "He was always good, but he was lonely. You have brought light into his life." That evening, after the Reverend had left, Helena stood at the window watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Gerald came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his hands resting on her belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that first day," Helena said. "When I stepped off the train crying. I was so afraid, so certain I had made a terrible mistake. And then you were there and you said those words that I will never forget. Wipe those tears. You are home. I did not believe you then, but you were right. This is home. You are home." Gerald tightened his arms around her. "I knew from the moment I saw you that my life was changing. I just did not know how much. You have given me everything, Helena. Purpose, love, family. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift." "You already are worthy," Helena whispered. "You are the best man I have ever known." They stood together in the fading light, 2 people who had come together out of necessity and found something infinitely more precious. Love, real and deep and lasting. A partnership built on respect and trust. A future bright with possibility. July brought intense heat, and Helena struggled with the discomfort of late pregnancy. The baby was due in August, and she felt huge and ungainly. Gerald hovered constantly, making sure she did not overexert herself, insisting she rest frequently. "I am going to go mad if you keep treating me like spun glass," Helena finally said one afternoon, exasperated but amused. "I am perfectly capable of walking to the chicken coop." "I know," Gerald said sheepishly. "I just worry. I know you do. But I need you to trust that I will tell you if I need help." Mary Richardson moved into the spare room 2 weeks before Helena's due date, ready to assist with the birth. Mrs. Richardson planned to come when labor began, having experience as a midwife. On August 15th, Helena woke at dawn with the first contractions. She waited until she was sure this was real labor before waking Gerald, not wanting to alarm him prematurely. When she finally told him, his face went pale. "I will get Mrs. Richardson," he said immediately. "There is time," Helena assured him. "But yes, you should probably ride over there soon." Gerald practically ran to the barn, and Helena could not help but smile at his panic. Men could be so helpless in the face of childbirth. Mrs. Richardson arrived within an hour, calm and capable. She examined Helena and pronounced everything progressing normally. "First babies take their time," she said matter-of-factly. "You have hours yet, most likely." Gerald paced the main room like a caged animal, unable to settle. Samuel and the ranch hands kept their distance, recognizing this was a private family matter. Mary stayed with Helena, offering encouragement and cool cloths for her forehead as the labor intensified. The hours passed slowly, punctuated by increasingly strong contractions. Helena tried to stay calm, remembering that women had done this since the beginning of time, but the pain was worse than she had anticipated. She gripped Mary's hand and focused on her breathing, the way Mrs. Richardson had instructed. "You are doing wonderfully," Mary kept saying. "So brave. So strong." As afternoon turned to evening, the contractions came faster and harder. Mrs. Richardson checked her again and nodded. "Almost time. This baby is ready to come into the world." Gerald knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" "Not yet," Mrs. Richardson called back. "Soon." But Helena said, "Let him in, I want him here." Mrs. Richardson looked surprised but nodded. Gerald entered tentatively, his eyes going immediately to Helena's flushed, sweat-dampened face. "I am here," he said, taking her hand. "I am right here." Helena squeezed his hand hard as another contraction hit. Gerald winced but did not pull away, letting her grip him as tightly as she needed. "All right, Helena," Mrs. Richardson said. "With the next contraction, I need you to push." The next hour was a blur of pain and effort. Helena pushed with all her strength, drawing on reserves she did not know she had. Gerald stayed beside her the entire time, his presence anchoring her, his voice in her ear telling her she was strong. She was brave. She could do this. And then, finally, there was a release, and the thin wail of a newborn filled the room. Mrs. Richardson lifted the baby, checking quickly, and then smiled. "A boy," she announced. "A healthy baby boy." Helena sagged back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but elated. Gerald was staring at the baby with an expression of absolute wonder as Mrs. Richardson cleaned and wrapped the infant. "Here," Mrs. Richardson said, placing the baby in Helena's arms. "Meet your son." Helena looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at her with unfocused eyes. Her son. "Their son, Thomas," she said softly. "Thomas Gerald Whitmore." Gerald leaned down, touching one finger to the baby's tiny hand. Thomas immediately grasped it, his grip surprisingly strong for something so small. "Hello, son," Gerald said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world." Mrs. Richardson and Mary discreetly left the room, giving the new family a few moments alone. Gerald sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Helena, both of them staring at the miracle they had created. "You were amazing," Gerald said. "I have never seen anything braver." "I am just glad it is over," Helena said with a tired laugh. "That was much harder than anyone warned me it would be. But worth it." Helena looked at her husband and their son, at the family they had become, and smiled. Worth every moment. The days following Thomas's birth were a blur of exhaustion and joy. Helena had never known she could be so tired and so happy at the same time. The baby nursed well and seemed healthy, though he kept them up at all hours with his need for feeding and changing. Gerald was a devoted father from the first moment, handling the baby with surprising confidence. He would walk the floor with Thomas when the baby fussed, singing softly to him, and Helena would watch from the bed, her heart overflowing. Mary stayed for a week to help with the household tasks, giving Helena time to rest and recover. She was a godsend, cooking meals and keeping the house running smoothly while Helena focused on the baby. "You are going to be a wonderful mother yourself someday," Helena told Mary as they sat together one afternoon, watching Thomas sleep. Mary blushed. "I hope so. There is a young man I have been walking out with. His name is Peter. He works at the lumber mill in town. I think he might ask my father for permission to court me officially soon." "That is wonderful," Helena said warmly. "I hope to meet him." As Helena regained her strength, she settled into the rhythms of motherhood. It was harder than she had anticipated, the constant demands of an infant, but she found deep satisfaction in caring for her son. Watching Gerald with Thomas was perhaps the greatest joy of all. The tenderness he showed, the patience, the obvious love, all of it made her fall in love with her husband even more deeply. By September, Helena had mostly recovered from the birth and was feeling more like herself. Thomas was growing rapidly, his tiny features becoming more defined. He had Gerald's eyes, that same gray-green color, and Helena's dark hair. The ranch continued its work around them. The fall roundup began, and Gerald hired extra hands again. The house was often full of activity, with Helena cooking for the men and managing the household while also caring for Thomas. It was exhausting but fulfilling. One evening in October, after the roundup was complete and the extra hands had been paid and sent on their way, Gerald made an announcement at dinner. "I have been thinking," he said, looking at Helena across the table. "The ranch has had a good year. We turned a profit and I have been saving money. I want to build an addition to the house. Another bedroom for Thomas, and maybe a parlor where you could hold those school sessions you talked about." Helena's eyes widened. "Gerald, that is a wonderful idea, but can we afford it?" "We can. And I want to. This family will grow, God willing. Thomas will need his own room, and you should have your school. You are too talented a teacher to let that gift go to waste." Work on the addition began in November and continued through the mild winter. Gerald did most of the work himself, with help from Samuel and occasionally some of the neighbors. Slowly, the house expanded, new rooms taking shape. Helena watched the construction with excitement, imagining how she would arrange a small schoolroom, what books she would need, how she would advertise the school to the scattered families in the area. Thomas celebrated his first Christmas at 6 months old, a chubby, happy baby who was starting to sit up on his own. The house was full of warmth and laughter, with Mary and Peter visiting, as well as the Richardsons and the Gibsons from town. "This is what I always dreamed this house would be," Gerald said quietly to Helena as they watched their friends enjoying the celebration. "Full of life and love and family." "We have built something good here," Helena agreed. "Something worth all the risks and fears." In February of 1884, the addition was complete. Helena spent weeks setting up the schoolroom, arranging desks Gerald had built, organizing the books she had ordered from catalogs, creating a space that was welcoming and conducive to learning. She put out word through the church and the general store that she would be offering lessons 3 days a week for children of all ages. The response was greater than she had hoped. By March, she had 8 students ranging from age 6 to 14, children of ranch families and town merchants who were hungry for education. Teaching filled a need in Helena she had not fully recognized. She loved being a mother, loved her life with Gerald and Thomas, but this gave her an outlet for her intellect and education. The children were eager learners, and watching them progress was deeply satisfying. Gerald supported her completely, often caring for Thomas during school hours, bouncing the baby on his knee while going over ranch accounts or playing with him on the floor. He was a natural father, patient and playful, and Thomas adored him. Life fell into a rich, full pattern. The ranch prospered under Gerald's careful management. Helena's school grew, with 2 more students joining by the end of the year. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, walking at 13 months and chattering in baby talk that his parents pretended to understand. In the fall of 1884, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise but no less joyful. Gerald's face lit up with the same wonder as before. "A brother or sister for Thomas," he said, placing his hand on her still flat belly. "Our family is growing." This pregnancy was easier than the first, Helena's body already knowing what to expect. She continued teaching through the winter, finally stopping when she grew too large and tired in the spring. In May of 1885, Helena gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter and easier than with Thomas, and soon Helena was holding a tiny, perfect little girl with wisps of blonde hair and blue eyes that might change color as she grew. "Grace," Helena said, looking at Gerald. "Grace Helena Whitmore." "It is perfect," Gerald agreed, gently touching his daughter's cheek. "She is perfect." Thomas, now nearly 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to help with everything, bringing Helena diapers and patting Grace's head with careful gentleness. "Gentle Thomas," Helena would remind him. "She is very small. My baby," Thomas would say proudly. "My Grace." The house felt complete now, full of the sounds of children and life. Helena sometimes thought back to that frightened young woman who had stepped off the train in Mojave nearly 3 years earlier, tears streaming down her face, terrified of the future. That woman had been transformed by love and purpose into someone strong and confident, someone who had found exactly where she was meant to be. Mary married Peter in the summer of 1885, and Helena stood up as her attendant, with little Thomas serving as an adorable, if easily distracted, ring bearer. It was a joyous celebration, and Helena was happy to see her friend so clearly in love. "I hope my marriage is as happy as yours and Gerald's," Mary whispered to Helena during the reception. "If you work at it and choose each other every day, it will be," Helena assured her. "That is the secret. Not romance, though that helps, just choosing to love over and over again." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Grace developed into a sweet, determined little girl who adored her mother and followed her everywhere. In 1887, Helena gave birth to a 3rd child, another son they named Samuel, after the faithful ranch hand who had been with them since the beginning. Old Samuel was touched beyond words when they told him, his weathered face creasing in a rare smile. The ranch continued to prosper. Gerald added sheep to their livestock, diversifying their income as he had long planned. Helena's school had grown to 15 students, and she had hired a young woman from town to help with the younger children. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. The sounds of children laughing, playing, sometimes arguing filled every corner. It was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. On a warm evening in September of 1889, 7 years almost to the day since Helena had first arrived in Mojave, she and Gerald sat on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas, now 7, was playing with 5-year-old Grace and 2-year-old Samuel in the yard, their shouts and laughter carrying on the evening air. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Helena asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "I told you to wipe those tears and that you were home," Gerald said. "How could I forget? It was the truest thing I have ever said." "I did not believe you then," Helena admitted. "I thought you were just trying to be kind, that this place could never really be home. And now—" Helena looked at their children, at the house they had built together, at the land stretching out around them, painted gold by the setting sun. She felt Gerald's steady presence beside her, his hand finding hers and holding it tightly. "Now I know that home is not just a place," she said softly. "It is people, it is love, it is choosing to build a life together despite all the fears and uncertainties. You gave me that, Gerald. You gave me everything." Gerald pulled her close, kissing her temple. "We gave each other everything. I was just a lonely man with an empty house before you came. You filled it with life and love and purpose. You made me whole." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, each of them reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought them together. A desperate advertisement, a frightened young woman, a lonely cowboy willing to take a chance. From such unpromising beginnings, a lifetime of love had grown. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Thomas ran up to the porch out of breath and excited. "Papa, can you teach me to rope tomorrow? You promised." Gerald ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "I did promise. Right after morning chores we will practice." Thomas whooped with joy and ran back to tell his siblings. Helena and Gerald exchanged amused glances. "He is going to be a rancher, that one," Gerald observed. "Born to it." "And Grace wants to be a teacher like her mother," Helena added. "She is already organizing her dolls into classroom formations and giving them lessons." "What about Samuel? What do you think he will be?" Helena laughed. "Samuel is 2 years old. Right now he mostly wants to eat dirt and chase the chickens. We will have to wait and see." As the evening deepened and the air cooled, they called the children inside for baths and bedtime. The ritual of getting 3 young children ready for sleep was familiar chaos, but eventually all 3 were clean, dressed in nightclothes and tucked into their beds. Helena and Gerald made the rounds, kissing each child goodnight. Thomas wanted one more story. Grace needed her special blanket adjusted just so. Samuel needed one more drink of water. But finally, all were settled and the house grew quiet. In their own room, Helena sat at her dressing table, brushing out her hair while Gerald prepared for bed. They had done this thousands of times, but it never felt routine. There was comfort in the familiar ritual, in the shared space and shared life. "I have been thinking," Gerald said as they lay in bed, the lamp turned low. "Maybe we should take a trip to San Francisco next year. The children are old enough now to handle travel, and I think you would enjoy seeing the city." "That sounds wonderful," Helena said. "I would love to take the children somewhere they could experience more culture, more variety than what we have here." "They will always come back to this land, though," Gerald said with certainty. "This place is in their blood now, same as it is in ours." Helena thought about that, about how this harsh, beautiful desert had become not just her home but part of her identity. She understood now why people fought so hard to make a life in the West, why they endured the hardships and isolation. There was a freedom here, a sense of possibility that did not exist in the crowded cities back east. "I love you," she said simply, turning to face her husband in the dim light. "I love you too," Gerald replied, pulling her close. Every day, more than the day before. They held each other in the quiet darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary. Outside, the desert night was full of stars and silence. Inside, there was warmth and love and the soft breathing of sleeping children. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew tall and strong, taking on more responsibility around the ranch. Grace excelled in her studies and helped her mother teach the younger students. Samuel developed a love for animals and could often be found in the barn, caring for any creature that needed attention. In 1892, Helena gave birth to one final child, a daughter they named Emma. At 32 years old, Helena declared this would be their last, and Gerald agreed. 4 children were a blessing and plenty to keep them busy. The ranch had grown to be one of the most successful in the region. Gerald's reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock was well established. Helena's school had become an institution, with former students now bringing their own children to learn. Mary and Peter, now with 3 children of their own, remained close friends. The Richardsons were beloved neighbors, always ready to help in times of need. The community around Mojave had grown and developed, with new families arriving and establishing themselves. Through it all, Helena and Gerald's love remained the foundation of everything. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding. But they had learned to talk through problems, to give each other grace, to remember the commitment they had made to choose each other every day. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1893, Gerald surprised Helena by taking her to San Francisco for a week, leaving the children in the capable care of Mary and Mrs. Richardson. It was the first time they had been truly alone together since the early days of their marriage. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, attended the theater, and walked through parks and museums. Helena reveled in the culture and sophistication she had once known, but by the end of the week, she was ready to go home. "As wonderful as this has been," she told Gerald as they prepared to board the train back to Mojave, "I miss our children and our ranch. I miss the desert and the silence and our life." "Me too," Gerald agreed. "This was a nice visit, but it is not home anymore." The train journey back was filled with anticipation. When they finally arrived at the Mojave station, they found all 4 children waiting with Mary, bouncing with excitement at their parents' return. Thomas, now 11, tried to maintain a dignified composure but could not help grinning broadly. Grace, 9, and Samuel, 6, openly jumped with joy. Little Emma, just a year old, reached her chubby arms out to her mother with a cry of recognition. Helena scooped up Emma and hugged her tightly, while Gerald gathered the other 3 into his arms. The family stood on the platform, reunited and complete, and Helena felt her eyes fill with tears. But these were not the tears of fear and uncertainty she had shed on this same platform so many years ago. These were tears of pure joy and gratitude. "I missed you all so much," she said, kissing each child in turn. "We missed you too, Mama," Grace said. "But we were very good for Aunt Mary, were we not, Aunt Mary?" Mary laughed. "You were mostly good." Thomas tried to teach Samuel how to ride the bull, which gave me several gray hairs, but otherwise, yes, you were good. Gerald shot Thomas a look that promised a conversation later about appropriate levels of risk, but his eyes were full of fondness. These were his children, growing and learning and becoming themselves, and he could not have been more proud. The ride back to the ranch was noisy and chaotic, with all 3 older children talking at once, trying to tell their parents everything that had happened while they were gone. Emma babbled along happily, not wanting to be left out even though she could not yet form words. When the ranch came into view, Helena felt the same sense of homecoming she always felt at this site. The house, larger now than the one she had first seen, stood solid and welcoming. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained. The creek sparkled in the afternoon sun. Everything was exactly as it should be. That evening, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Helena and Gerald sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. "Thank you for taking me to San Francisco," Helena said. "It was wonderful to have that time together." "Thank you for being willing to come back," Gerald replied. "I know the city has attractions that this place cannot offer." "The city has culture and convenience," Helena acknowledged. "But this place has something more important. It has our family, our work, our purpose. It has us. I would not trade that for all the theaters and restaurants in the world." Gerald took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I think about that day you arrived sometimes. How scared you were, how I had no idea what to say or do to make you feel better. I just knew I had to try." "You said exactly the right thing," Helena told him. "You told me I was home, and you made it true. Every day since then you have made it true." They sat in peaceful silence, two people who had found each other through a combination of desperation and fate, and had created something neither could have imagined alone. The desert night settled around them, vast and beautiful and full of stars. The children grew and thrived. Thomas, at 18, took over more of the ranch operations, working alongside his father with skill and dedication. He was courting a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Alice, and Gerald and Helena suspected a wedding announcement would come soon. Grace, at 16, had become an accomplished teacher in her own right, taking over the younger students at Helena's school while her mother focused on the older children and administrative tasks. She was beautiful and intelligent, with several young men vying for her attention, though she seemed in no rush to choose among them. Samuel, at 13, had his father's quiet strength and his mother's gentle nature. He had a gift with animals that went beyond mere skill into something almost mystical. Injured or sick creatures seemed to heal faster under his care. Emma, now 8, was the baby of the family and knew how to use that position to her advantage. She had all her siblings wrapped around her finger and could make her father melt with a single smile. But beneath the charm, she had a sharp mind and a determination that reminded Helena of herself at that age. In 1898, Thomas married Alice in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Mojave. The whole community turned out to celebrate, and Gerald stood with barely suppressed tears as he watched his eldest son take his vows. Helena held his hand, understanding the bittersweet mix of pride and sorrow at seeing their child become a man. Thomas and Alice built a small house on the ranch property, and soon they announced they were expecting their first child. The news that Helena would become a grandmother filled her with a complicated mix of emotions. She was only 38, hardly old, but somehow the title of grandmother made real the passage of time. When Thomas and Alice's son was born in early 1899, they named him Gerald Thomas, honoring both his grandfather and father. Helena held her tiny grandson and marveled at the continuation of the family they had built. This child was the future, the next generation that would carry on the Whitmore name and legacy. Grace surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to a women's college in San Francisco to study education formally. Helena and Gerald were torn between pride in her ambition and sadness at the thought of her leaving, but they supported her choice. In the fall of 1899, they took her to the city and saw her settled in her dormitory. "She will come back," Gerald said on the long train ride home, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. The land calls to her same as it does to Thomas. Perhaps, Helena said gently. Or perhaps she will find her calling elsewhere. Either way, she will always be our daughter and we will always support her. As the new century dawned in 1900, the Whitmore family gathered at the ranch to celebrate. 3 generations now, with baby Gerald toddling around, Thomas and Alice glowing with new parenthood, Samuel and Emma still at home, and Grace home from college for the holidays. They stood together on the porch as the clock struck midnight, marking not just a new year but a new century. Helena looked at the family around her, this amazing, improbable family that had grown from her desperate decision to answer an advertisement so many years ago. "To the new century," Gerald said, raising his glass of cider. "May it bring as much blessing as the last one did." "To family," Helena added, "to love and home and the bonds that hold us together." They all drank, and in that moment Helena felt the full weight of her contentment. She had lived a life beyond what she could have imagined standing on that train platform crying. She had found love, built a home, raised children, served her community. She had become someone she could be proud of. As the party continued inside, Helena stepped away for a moment, needing a breath of quiet. She walked a short distance from the house, looking up at the stars that were the same stars she had wondered at that first night so long ago. Gerald found her there, as she had known he would. He was as attuned to her moods and needs now as he had been back then, perhaps even more so after nearly 18 years of marriage. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Everything," Helena said. "How far we have come, how much has changed. How much I love this life we have built. Any regrets?" "Not a single one," Helena said firmly. "Every choice, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow, all of it has led to this, to us, to them." She gestured toward the house where their children's laughter could be heard. "How could I regret any of it? I think about what my life would have been if you had not answered that advertisement," Gerald said quietly. "I would have continued alone, managing the ranch, going through the motions. I would never have known what I was missing. You saved me, Helena. You gave me a reason to truly live instead of just existing." "We saved each other," Helena corrected. "I was just as lost as you were, maybe more so. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me love when I had given up hope of ever finding it. Everything good in my life has come from that first moment when you told me to wipe my tears." They stood together under the vast star-filled sky, holding each other. Two people who had started as strangers bound by necessity and had become partners in the truest sense. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. In the distance, a coyote howled and another answered. It was a wild sound, a reminder that despite all they had built, they were still part of this untamed landscape. Helena had learned to love these sounds, the proof that nature continued its ancient rhythms regardless of human activities. "We should go back inside," Gerald said eventually, "before they start to worry." But neither moved immediately, both reluctant to leave this peaceful moment. Finally, Helena turned to face her husband fully, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for being the man you are, for loving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for stepping off that train," Gerald replied. "Even though you were crying. Especially because you were crying. It showed you were human, vulnerable, real. Not some idealized fantasy, but a real woman with fears and hopes and dreams. I fell in love with that woman, and I fall in love with her more every day." They kissed there under the stars. A kiss that held 18 years of shared history, of challenges overcome and joys celebrated. When they finally pulled apart and walked hand in hand back to the house, back to their family and the celebration continuing inside, Both felt the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. The years continued to pass, as years always do. Grace graduated from college and surprised everyone by returning to Mojave, bringing with her a young professor she had met in San Francisco. They married and opened an expanded school that drew students from all over the region. Grace's husband, Robert, shared her passion for education, and together they built something remarkable. Samuel, true to his nature, established a veterinary practice, having studied with several doctors and accumulated knowledge through years of experience. He married a rancher's daughter named Martha, and they settled on a small property near the family ranch. Emma, the baby of the family, turned out to be the most adventurous of them all. She married a mining engineer named Charles and moved to Colorado, though she visited frequently and always spoke of the ranch as home. As Gerald and Helena entered their 50s, they began to gradually turn over more of the ranch operations to Thomas while still maintaining oversight. Gerald's hair had gone gray, and Helena had laugh lines around her eyes, but both were healthy and active, still deeply in love. They became beloved grandparents, with Thomas and Alice eventually having 4 children, Samuel and Martha 3, and Grace and Robert 2. Emma and Charles added 3 more, though distance meant those grandchildren were not seen as often. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. The house and yard were filled with people, 3 generations of Whitmores and the friends and neighbors who had been part of their journey. Reverend Matthews, now elderly but still sharp, said a blessing over the gathering. Gerald and Helena Whitmore came together in faith and hope, not knowing what the future would hold. They chose to build rather than retreat, to love rather than merely coexist. They have created not just a family but a legacy of kindness, hard work, and devotion. May we all learn from their example. Later, when the party had quieted and most guests had departed, Helena and Gerald found themselves once again on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had tended for so many years. 25 years, Helena marveled. Where did they go? Into building this, Gerald said, gesturing to encompass everything around them. Every day, every moment, building something lasting. Do you think we succeeded? Helena asked. Did we build something that will last beyond us? Gerald looked at his wife, at the woman who had stepped off a train crying and had become the center of his universe. Look at our children, our grandchildren. Look at the school, the ranch, the community we are part of. Yes, Helena, we succeeded beyond what I could have dreamed. And it is all because you had the courage to answer an advertisement and take a chance on a lonely cowboy in the middle of nowhere. Best decision I ever made, Helena said softly. Even though I was terrified at the time, even though I cried and thought I had made a horrible mistake. Best decision of my life. They sat together as darkness fell, as they had done thousands of times before, and would do thousands of times again. The desert stars emerged one by one, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story and would shine long after they were gone. But that night, sitting together in peace and contentment, neither thought about endings. They thought only of the richness of the present moment, of the love that surrounded them, of the life they had built together from nothing but hope and determination. In the house behind them, their grandchildren slept, dreaming child dreams. Their children chatted quietly in the main room, comfortable in the home they had grown up in. The ranch stretched out in all directions, a testament to hard work and vision. Helena leaned against Gerald's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. No words were needed. After 25 years of marriage, they could communicate in silence, understanding each other's thoughts and feelings without explanation. The future was uncertain, as it always had been. There would be more challenges, more changes, perhaps more sorrow along with the joy, but they would face it together, as they had faced everything else. And if someone had asked Helena in that moment whether she regretted stepping off that train in tears so many years ago, whether she wished she had made a different choice, she would have laughed at the absurdity of the question. Because here in this place, with this man, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, Helena Whitmore was exactly where she was meant to be. She was home, just as Gerald had promised her on that first day. She had always been home from the moment she had arrived. The tears she had shed were long dried, replaced by tears of joy, of laughter, of life fully lived. And as she sat there in the gathering darkness, held safely in her husband's arms, Helena knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here. She was home. She had always been home, and she always would be.